The Ukraine is a minerally rich nation, but more so, it is also agriculturally blessed, serving as the breadbasket for Europe, with wheat fields stretched far and wide, along with major cities like Kiev. The country is the second largest in Europe behind Russia. However, it has a sordid past with its neighbor to the east, dating back to the time of the Russian Empire. However, the relationship between the two reached a standoff when in the early 1930s, Joseph Stalin instituted a plan in the Ukraine to subdue the nation and break all resistance. It was a plan that resulted in the deaths of millions of innocent civilians. Today on Learning the Social Sciences, we are going to discuss and explain the Holodomor, when Russia starved the Ukraine. The Kievan Rus arose in Eastern Europe in the 9th century. They started off as a confederation of principalities in what is modern-day Ukraine, Belarus, and Western Russia. Their nation was growing in wealth and was known as a regional power until the Mongols invaded in the 13th century and conquered it in the 14th. However, the Principality of Kiev would see fighting between the Mongols, Lithuanians, and the Poles for the centuries to come, eventually falling under the Polish crown in the 16th century, which would last for 100 years until the region was given to the Russians. Eventually, Catherine the Great would take away the autonomy that it had operated under up until that point in 1775. In 1917, the Bolsheviks were taking control in Russia. Kiev started to set up a government, starting with a council that led to the Ukraine declaring its independence in 1918. Yet, a civil war broke out as vying powers sought to control the government, thus weakening the young nation. In 1921, the Soviet Union's Red Army came in and conquered 2/3 of the nation and established the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, a puppet state of the Soviet Union. The other third was absorbed into Poland. In the 1920s, though, the Ukrainian language and culture was embraced and encouraged. But things changed in the 1930s when the leader of the Soviet Union turned his eyes towards the Ukraine's wheat fields and the country as a whole. When Stalin took control of the Soviet Union and enforced his 5-year plans to quickly industrialize the nation, part of his plan involved collectivization. This policy had the peasantry give up their land under the threat of force so they could join a large collective of farms. The food that they would grow would be property of the state, and they would have no say in where it would go or what would happen to it. Stalin tried to force the Ukrainians to collectivize too, but his efforts failed as they did not want to work in a factory-like agricultural system. Even sending 50,000 farmers to Siberia did not break the will of the people. By 1932, his efforts were not realized, and worse, the harvests in the Soviet Union were lower than expected, and they were about 60% short of the target set in the Ukraine. Stalin needed more food, and on top of that, he wanted the Ukrainians to submit to his policies. In 1932 and 1933, Joseph Stalin used food to make the Ukrainians submit to his authority and desired to create state-run collectives in the country. To punish the people for such a low output and for their continued resistance, Stalin sent troops to take away the food from the farmers and sent soldiers to the border to make sure they could not flee the country to find refuge somewhere else or let the world know what was happening, or even more importantly, why it was happening. He also had tens of thousands of Ukrainian intellectuals and teachers arrested and removed all school books that were in the Ukrainian language. From that point on, he wanted everyone to conform in every way to the Soviet Union, including learning in Russian. The plan would create a man-made famine with devastating effects as millions found themselves without anything to eat overnight. People became desperate for food. Some would dig through the barren fields with their hands, trying to find any missed potato or other edible item. Emaciated people wandered the countryside, trying to find food or refuge for themselves and their families. People ate flowers, roots, leaves, or even killed their family pets. Anything to try to help them survive. Farmers also had to go and kill their farm animals just so they could have something to eat. Those that tried to flee the country were shot by Soviet forces or drowned in the icy cold rivers. During the famine's height, around 5,000 people died per day, and an estimated 4 million people died throughout the ordeal. Yes, 4 million people died so Stalin could break any resistance against him within the Ukraine. Some even estimate that possibly 7 million people died. The number is unknown. In 1933, it was realized that 1/3 of the farmers had perished. Stalin lifted his orders and sent in Russian farmers to help plant the fields that no longer had enough workers. Russia has denied that the famine, known today as the Holodomor, was a genocide. The UN defines genocide as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, national, ethnical, racial, or religious groups. 16 countries, including the United States and Canada, have stated that a human-made famine fits the definition of genocide. The Soviet Union was able to hide this atrocity for decades, yet when it fell in the 1990s, the Ukraine gained its independence, and more people spoke about this brutal period and the mass suffering inflicted upon the people of the Ukraine. The memory of the Holodomor solidified Ukrainian nationalism, as it no longer sought to be under Russian domination and control, which was achieved in 1991, but placed in jeopardy again by Vladimir Putin. If you have any questions or comments about the Holodomor, please list them below. Also remember to press that like and subscribe button to know when we post more content here at Learning the Social Sciences. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.